Welcome to the E-commerce Profits Podcast, where we feature top founders and experts in the e-commerce industry and take an in-depth look at the struggles and successes in growing e-commerce brands profitably.
Hey guys, Josh Chin here. I'm the host of the E-commerce Profits Podcast, where we feature top experts in the e-commerce industry, and we go behind the scenes of the struggles and successes in growing e-commerce businesses and brands. This episode is brought to you by Chronos.agency. If you're a direct-to-consumer e-commerce brand that is ready for next level growth and to unlock the optimum customer lifetime value with email marketing, Chronos is your company. We have helped hundreds of brands get over $70 million in return from email alone, and our clients get an average of 3,500% ROI from our efforts on email. We've worked with brands like Truly Beauty, The Udi, Eliaskin, and many more. And for some reason, Sajag, beauty brands and apparel brands are just attracted to us. It has nothing to do with my fashion sense, obviously. But the next step is, if anyone's interested out there, email us at sales@chronos.agency. You can go to chronos.agency to learn more. And before we jump into introducing today's guest, I just want to give a big shout out and thank you to Dr. Jeremy Weiss. Go check out our website at rise25.com for thank you, Dr. Jeremy, for making this introduction. They specialize in helping B2B businesses get more clients, referral partners, and strategic partners through their Done For You podcast service. And today's guest, Sajag Agarwal, is a former seven-figure Amazon seller, the current founder of Movley, and in 2015, he founded and grew his first e-com brand to $2 million a year in less than 2 years. Plagued with quality control problems, Sajag moved to China for 6 months. He opened an office in Shenzhen and spent most of his time on the factory floor. While over there, he watched his inspectors fraudulently pass his bad production orders and did his own inspections. Out of frustration, in 2018, he founded Movley to make manufacturing overseas easier and more controllable. Today, Movley brings tech, data analytics, and better processes to do inspections better and more efficiently. Thank you for joining me, Sajag.
Thanks so much for having me on, Joshua, and super excited to be on.
Awesome. So first question, tell me a little bit more about your background. How did you end up in e-commerce, the whole scene, and what led you to Movley?
Yeah, that's a really good question. If you would have asked me like 10 years ago, hey, Sajag, you're going to be in supply chain in 10 years, I would have thought you're crazy. Supply chain was like the most boring industry on planet Earth. So there's no way I would end up in that, but here I am. But yeah, just a little bit about me. So I used to be a huge tech geek, huge gaming nerd. I used to play Minecraft all the time and just kind of got bored and started looking on eBay and started trading stuff on eBay like around 7, 8, 9 years ago now. And after doing that for a few years, I went into Amazon and put together my own Amazon brand. And we grew super quickly. So first year we did 40K, second year we did $1 million. And on our third year, we were on track to do 2 million that year. But unfortunately, what started happening is we just started having a lot of quality control problems. So we started having issues where some of our products were seeing 5 to 10% defect rates. Other ones of our products were seeing almost 100% of the products just breaking apart after a few months of use. So it was just a huge, huge problem. So back in 2017, I actually ended up moving to Shenzhen and I lived there for 6 months, basically on the factory floor every single day, 12 to 16-hour days on the factory, trying to understand, okay, hey, what's going on? Why are my products having problems? Why are we having all these supply chain issues? And started getting into the weeds of stuff. And while I was there, I actually watched one of my inspection companies that I was working with at the time. They told me this inspection was going to be about 9 hours. Went to the factory and I was watching the inspector without telling him that I was the client. And basically the inspector spent 3 hours at the factory, made up a bunch of results, and then did the inspection and told me it was passed on a defective batch of products. And then a few months later, ended up opening my own office in Shenzhen. And after running that for about a year, we started having a lot of problems again. And we found out that some of our employees were actually taking bribes from the suppliers and they were not working with the suppliers, not doing proper inspections, and just this huge mess. And that's actually when I went ahead and founded Movley. And that's why I kind of got into the business actually, was just I was so frustrated and so sick of dealing with kind of the problems that I had with my office, and I didn't have the economies of scale to really make a difference. So my goal with Movley was to actually bring those economies of scales, bring that personal approach in order to do inspections a little bit more effectively, and have them actually be trustable results.
That's an amazing story, and I cannot even begin to imagine the struggles of growing a brand when your suppliers and supply chain so far away from you physically are just being involved in fraud and bribery and just not doing their jobs right. What I'm really curious about is, well, it's doing one inspection per year. That's relatively easy, and if I were a business owner, I could make that inspection myself. If I, pre-COVID, I could fly down to China maybe once a year. But at scale, that gets harder and harder to do. How do you manage to pull that off with the number of brands that you guys have as clients today? What does inspections at scale look like?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And especially with inspections, like inspections should be done on every single order. So if you're ordering once a year, you're starting up, it's not that big of a deal. But when you're ordering every month and you have, 20, 30 different products and you're doing 30 inspections a month, it starts becoming really difficult to manage, keep track of everything. And the thing is that every product needs kind of a unique approach. So there's a unique way to inspect every product. And then certain products are higher risk. They start having more problems. You need to do better inspections for those products over time. Other products are doing well. Maybe you want to cool down on the inspection a little bit so you can save a little bit of cost and increase your efficiency. So it really comes down to each individual product. So doing them at scale becomes pretty challenging. And that's actually what we're trying to fix at Movley. And one of the ways we're doing that is we're actually building out a tech platform to streamline the entire process. And right now, what we do is, and which we're going to carry through in the future as well, is we like to take a little bit of a service pod approach. So our kind of tagline at Movley is we give you an entire quality control team for the price of an inspection. It's kind of, we like to look at ourselves as kind of your personal quality control team. So every client that we work with, we assign them a couple of people within our team that they work with. So every time they book an inspection, every time they have an issue, a problem, a concern, a question, they get contact the same group of people. And that group of people understands their business, they understand their products, their customers, and then can work with them to improve their inspections over time and kind of give them that very personal, iterative approach that inspections need on a day-to-day level. So that's kind of the approach we do when it comes to inspections. And then also to make sure that we can do inspections effectively and at the right time, we actually distribute our inspectors all across China. So you can get an inspector on site within 2 to 3 days of any time you need an inspection.
Any major city in China?
Yeah, the biggest city that we actually work with is Shenzhen. Shenzhen is one of the biggest cities, but we cover essentially any city in China. We cover
That's
almost
incredible.
99% of factories.
Wow, that is crazy. Talk me through the way you conduct tests, and how do you kind of think about sample sizes and what makes sense, and how frequently do you think about inspections, and typically with what most brands are going through, what people are getting back home are typically just photos of the product. And that's about it. How do you know what to look out for in product tests? And how do you select a good sample size for them?
That's a really good question. So it really comes to almost like a teamwork approach. Because a lot of stuff has to be, we have to pull from the brands. So as a brand, you want to make sure your inspection company understands your products. So
Mm-hmm.
for example, let's say, you work with, an inspection company, your inspector doesn't really know your customers or kind of what you expect in your products. A really good example I always like to use is that you can have combs. So in a dollar store, you can have a 30 cents comb, and that can be super flimsy. It can be cheap. That's not a big deal. That's fine.
Yep.
But if you're selling that same comb for $15 in on Amazon, then at that point you have to change it up a little bit because that flimsiness is not acceptable. So, things like that, are really important to convey over to the inspection company. So it really is kind of almost a little bit like a partnership. So we work with clients to kind of understand what are their expectations, what their problems are. We give them the ability to specify their own custom instructions during the inspection process. And the second thing we do is actually we work with inspectors and with other clients and actually aggregate data. So say we have 100 customers doing, similar products, we'll actually take tests from all of those clients and aggregate them together in our system to give really good recommendations. So when we go work with a client, let's say doing a comb, we'll actually go through 100 other combs that we've inspected and actually see, okay, hey, these are the best tests from all of these other combs that we've inspected. Here are some recommendations on things like that you can do. So it's really kind of a two-part approach to really coming up with good tests. And it also comes down to just understanding the product on an iteration level. So one really good way of coming up with product tests is actually letting your suppliers do the heavy work, heavy lifting for you. And that's really cool because when you actually go through the inspection process with the supplier and even the quality control process, it's really, really helpful to kind of go through this process when you're doing the initial negotiations, your initial sourcing. So you're talking to these 10, 15 suppliers on Alibaba or wherever you found them. You want to make sure those inspections are good, they're effective, so you can actually talk with your supplier in that stage. And when they're all trying to sell you, they're all trying to say, hey, work with us. Ask them, hey, what do you do for quality control on your products? How do you properly check your units? Do you have labs, to check your products? Do you use any equipment or machinery when you're running quality control on your products in the standard production? And essentially by talking to 10, 15 different suppliers, you can aggregate and put together a really strong list of product tests, product items, and things like that you can check and how to check them, and then give that to the inspection company like Movley. So that way we can do a really effective inspection in addition to our recommendations and our suggestions.
That's amazing. I love how you're pulling together basically collective intelligence and data of different brands and different products. And that's beautiful. Is that is that what makes Movley different from most inspection companies? Because from my perspective, I would imagine if I was working with a supplier, I would want to have my supplier run the inspections themselves and basically submit their results to me directly. So that's kind of more streamlined so that I don't have to work with multiple parties in the process. What's your take on that, and how does Movley play a part in that?
That's a really good question. So factories should be doing their own inspections on all of their orders. It's actually a
Hmm.
part that should be built into their production line. So say, for example, you have a production line with 10 steps. Two of those steps might be quality control, and they just go through each unit that they go through the manufacturing process with, make sure the product was manufactured correctly up to that part, and then making sure that checks off. And if it doesn't, maybe cycle it back or put it aside, things like that. So quality control is a part that should be part of the inspection process standard. And in addition to that, it's also something that needs to be embedded at the end of production. So factories should be doing that as well, maybe random spot checks, things like that, to make sure the products that they assembled are correct. But the thing with factory quality control is that inherently they're working for the factory. So if your factory wants to cut corners, they're also going to cut corners on quality control. They're also going to cut corners here and there. So businesses like whether you're a startup, you're a small business just doing a few orders a year, all the way to large Fortune 500s, all Fortune 500 companies are doing their own inspections. Either they have their own in-house inspectors or they hire third-party inspections, and they do that on every single order. So those are really critical because third-party inspectors like companies like Movley are actually working on the behalf of you, not the supplier. So our job is to make sure we catch defective products before your customers do. Whereas your supplier's job for quality control is just to catch enough problems and make sure that you buy the order. So that's kind of what is holding them accountable, is that you're consistently coming back to buy the order, but they don't see the bigger picture of the negative reviews coming in every day or the customer complaints or the returns. Those are things that you as a brand see. So Movley represents the brand. We don't represent the supplier. And that removes that sense of bias.
That's amazing. So what you're saying is having a third party like Movley, who's independent and built just for inspections, is basically acts as a check and balance on what could inherently be wrong or a problem with the supplier themselves. Um,
Exactly. We're essentially like the accountability to make sure that the supplier is doing the right manufacturing, the right checks. Because what ends up happening is that quality fade is a real thing. So you maybe your first order is good, your second order is good, your third order is good, then your fourth order is kind of bad. And then your fifth order gets a little bit worse. Then your sixth order gets a little bit worse. So quality fade is essentially when you have, really good quality and then it just kind of goes downhill after that. And sometimes it's consistent, sometimes it's, all of a sudden after a couple of orders. It really depends. We've had clients reach out to us where they've worked with the same supplier for 2 years. And then all of a sudden they have this bad order. And then all the orders after that have been bad as well. And when that one bad order happens, it's catastrophic. So, especially if you're selling on marketplaces like on Amazon and you get those negative reviews, it's almost like product suicide. You might have to re-rank the product, you might have to rebuild the whole listing, and it creates a lot of issues. And Shopify store owners are actually really lucky because they kind of control their own review system. So it's a lot easier for them to say, okay, hey, we'll replace the product, we'll take care of that. But even then, with returns and warranty claims, replacing those units that are defective or not working, that can add up. So actually, we made a really simple calculation. If you have about $3,000 of defective goods, that is enough to pay for all your inspections for 7 years if you do them quarterly, just in the cost of returns and warranty claims for administering for $3,000 defective products. And when you're doing an order of $30,000, $300,000, and 50% of those units or even 5% of those units are defective, that adds up to a lot of money and can pay for your inspections tens and hundreds and thousands of times over. So that's really where that accountability process is really critical, because if there's a lack of accountability and you're not verifying that the quality is done properly, then your supplier is essentially on free reins. And as long as you keep buying, which, you're not going to find out, you're going to have problems until, you've already spent the money, you've already lost the money. At that point, it's a little bit too late. So it's preventative maintenance to prevent that from happening when it does.
Amazing. And a dollar saved is a dollar earned in the bottom line. So
exactly.
I don't see any brands that should not be doing this at all. Let's talk a little bit about negative reviews and negative feedback and complaints. Well, before they turn into negative reviews, hopefully. What does that loop look like as far as feedback from customers going back to the brand and from the brand to the manufacturer and the supplier? I find that can often be disjointed and an issue, especially in communicating with companies and factories that may speak a different language than you do. How do you manage that process? Is there an automation for that?
That's a really good question. And I think e-commerce companies have it way easier than brick and mortar. Previously, if you sold to like Walmart, you sold to Target or like, 100 brick and mortar stores, what would happen is you have 100 different feedback sources, reports, and each report would be structured differently. And, if a retailer is returning a few items to you or things like that, they return it to the retailer, not to you. So when you're trying to compile it as a supply chain team, you're kind of working in a silo. You're like, hey, we're getting a couple of returns. We're not sure what the problems are, what the reasons are, things like that. And it just ends up being this weird silo. But e-commerce brands have this added advantage of basically having everything in one place, whether it's Amazon, Shopify, or just a couple of different online channels that are responsible for all their sales. So what's really cool is you can actually take data from returns, from warranty claims, and things like that, and cycle that data back into the manufacturing process, work with the supplier to improve those issues, and also work with the inspection company to verify those problems have been fixed so you don't see those issues over and over again. And essentially the way you can do that is you can pretty much, as you said, automate and streamline that process. You can have your customer support team, anytime they have a return or warranty claim, put that in an Excel spreadsheet sorted by SKU and, put the most common reasons and things like that. So you can actually see that and then convey that over to the supply chain team. And what's really cool is you can essentially take that and take it to your supplier and say, hey, these are the issues we're having. We need you to work with us to fix these. How can we fix these? And you can also ask them, how do we test to make sure that you did fix these? And kind of bridge it on the supplier to kind of figure that out. And then from there, once you have a pretty clear idea of, okay, hey, the issue is fixed, the supplier is going to make sure these issues are fixed moving forwards, you can actually factor that feedback back into the inspection process. So you can use the inspection process to actually improve your product more so than just check your product. So you can tell you can tell Movley, for example, or any inspection company, hey, here's some additional checks that we need done. And with Movley, especially, if you come to us and say, hey, I have these negative reviews, I have these problems, our team can actually work with you to get those problems checked, add them to the inspection process, and make sure we're testing enough units. So that way, next time we do an inspection, we can catch those problems and then make sure that, those don't get to the customer. So you can reduce your return rate over time and reduce your warranty claim rate if you're, having warranty replacements.
That's amazing. And talk to me about fraud and bribery. I know we are taking a step back here, but before we started this interview, we were having a conversation earlier, and you told me that you had a very interesting story around fraud and bribery in your experience in that area. Was it in China, or was it what was that like?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So that was actually right here in Chicago. So I'm based out of Chicago for everybody listening. And my story on fraud, I guess, was right here in Chicago. So this is something pretty close to home. And it really puts fraud and bribery into a new perspective. So I always like talking about it. But essentially, I went to my local foot doctor here, and I have flat feet. So I went to the foot doctor here in Chicago, and I went to his office. First time I met the guy, and basically, I found out I have flat feet, and he said, hey, Sajag, you're going to need this pair of orthotics. And he gave me a pair of these $50 orthotics, and he said, hey, try these on. So I tried them on, had a really good conversation with the guy, through the appointment while I was trying them on. And he was asking a little bit about me, my line of work, things like that. And I was talking to him about him, his line of work. We just had a good conversation. We kind of hit it off. And after the end of the conversation, he was like, all right, cool. These orthotics fit you. These are good to go. And I said, okay, awesome. How do I check out? Do I just, pay for these at the front desk when I leave? Do you bill my insurance? How does it work? And he said, your insurance doesn't cover it, but I'm going to give it to you for free. And I was like, oh, okay, awesome. I'll take a free pair of orthotics. And then he said, okay, all right, sounds good. Let me get a nurse to check you out. So 2 minutes later, he walks in with his nurse, and she's there. And he's like, all right, Sajag, I'm going to need you to follow the nurse out. She's going to kind of take you a little bit of a weird way out through the back entrance, because they don't like me giving away shit for free. And I was like, oh, it's fine. It's $50. I can pay for it. It's no big deal. And he says, no, I insist. I like you. You're a cool guy. What's an extra $50 to you versus this, $1 billion hospital group? They don't care about it. So I insist you're going to leave here for it, and you're not going to pay a dime. And I was like, okay, sounds good. I took it, but, I didn't give him $25 to get a $50 pair of orthotics. I didn't bribe him. And there was a human element that resulted in that, transaction. And that's the same thing that happens when it comes to inspections. So a lot of people have this misconception, the inspector goes to the factory, they're going to find a lot of problems. And then the factory is going to say, hey, we want to pay you to get rid of these problems. But what most often happens is that, number one, there's a human element, which crowds out the fraud. So there may not even be a bribe involved, or if there is a bribe involved, the human element comes first. So the inspector might feel, hey, I like you, you're a cool guy, I'll take your money and pass your products because of that human element. And that's one of the biggest differentiators. The term that a lot of people like to use, what I've noticed, especially one of my good friends who's a lawyer who works with China, he likes to use the word honest thieves. That's kind of the way that they look at it. But there's that human element, which makes them feel like it's not as bad. And then the second thing is that the biggest thing is when you have fraud and bribery, a lot of times, it's not because you're having bad actors and things like that. A lot of times you're just, you might feel there's fraud, or you might feel that, there's problems in the supply chain. And that's because the inspectors don't know what to do, and they don't have that personal connection with your brand. Maybe they're not inspecting your products properly, or they're lacking that human connection with your brand. And that's something that, all inspection companies should be doing a really good job of addressing. And that's one of the things we address with our service pods, because we try to keep it really personal. We get to know you as a brand. We get to keep that human element. And then we like to convey that over to the inspector. Hey, a lot of our clients are, these small brands, when you pass a defective batch of products, even by 1%, that's sometimes enough to completely demolish their Amazon listing, right? That 1% extra defects. If you're only getting reviews from 1-2% of customers, and now you have a 2% defect rate, that's product suicide. That can destroy your Amazon listing. But to an inspector, it's just 1%, 2%. What's a few extra defects to this $1 billion American company, or, UK company, Canadian company? So creating that human connection is really critical to prevent fraud and bribery. And number two is really just making sure the inspector is equipped. If you're not paying them well, you're giving them unreasonable time quotas, where you're saying, hey, you have 8 hours You have an 8-hour inspection and you have 3 hours to do it. Like in my case, when I was watching my inspector, he had 2 to 3 other inspections that same day. That's why he only came to the factory for 3 hours. And, he was like, okay, hey, I know you gave me a 9-hour inspection. That's probably what was going through his mind. I know you gave me a 9-hour inspection, but I have 3 other inspections to do today. Clearly management doesn't care about me doing a good inspection. So obviously the clients don't care either because they're hiring this company. So why should I care? And that's how it kind of, becomes a domino effect. So that's really kind of the approach to fraud and bribery, at least in my opinion, that I've seen and what I've observed when it comes to inspections, quality control, and even just general manufacturing in China, with my inspectors and my own team taking bribes from factories.
Oh, that's a tough one to resolve. Aside from that, what are some of the most common mistakes that you see brands make when they manufacture or source from China? I know it's a broad question, but I just want to throw it out there. What are some of the
Yeah,
common trends?
that's a really good question. I think one of the biggest common problems I see is that a lot of times brands like to treat their suppliers very transactionally. So they like to say, okay, hey, I'm giving you, $100 or I'm giving you $200 or whatever, $200,000, and I'm
Mm,
expecting this order delivered at this quality. And they kind of just treat them like, a buying partner, like they're going to like Nordstrom or Macy's.com and buying an order of 1,000 units. And I don't see a lot of times, there's a lot of brands that do this really well, but essentially you want to work with your brand. You want your brand to work with your supplier, almost like a partner in crime. Hey, we want to work together. We want to grow with you, giving them an introduction, working with them through the kinks and things like that, and kind of treating it more relationship based more than transactional. Because at the end of the day, that relationship is what powers that transaction. So, for example, if you have a really good relationship with your supplier and you say, hey, we're having customer reviews, we're having problems, and our customers are returning items, and we want to work with you, we want to grow with you, can you look into this problem for us? That's going to go a lot better than, hey, we paid you 50 grand for this order and it's not up to quality specs, we're getting a lot of returns, we're getting replacements, we're not we're not happy with your performance, we're going to go talk with another supplier if you don't fix this. It's less of a relationship approach and more of a transactional approach. So
mm.
keeping that relationship through your supply chain and with your suppliers, with your vendors, even with your service providers is really critical to making sure that you get the best out of it, because at the end of the day, the people running everything are humans, and
Yeah.
it's really easy to forget that.
Yeah, and that's the same with pretty much any service-based business relationship as well. I mean, we experience the same thing, and at Chronos, we try to keep things as as professional as possible. But sometimes, when the relationship gets damaged, it does sour the communication to some degree, and just isn't that productive anymore. So final question before we wrap up here. What are some of the brands that you admire, or clients that you have worked with that you really admire, and why?
That's a really good question. So we do have non-disclosure agreements with our clients, so we don't really disclose the clients we work with on our site or anything like that. And so we don't really have like a client reel. I'm sure some of our clients would be fine, but I guess we've not really discussed that with them. So I can't really share that, but we worked with some really, really cool clients. I can just kind of share in a generalization. So we
Sure.
worked with clients doing like custom car parts at one point for like high-end sports cars, which was really, really cool. We work with clients that do art, which is really interesting. It's a little bit specialized, so it's not like we're art inspectors. So I always like to say that to the client too when we were onboarding her. But so we can't get super detailed. We're not going to have that artistic eye, because we're not, we're inspectors. We're not artists. So it's a little bit different. But we've worked on art too, and we've just worked. A lot of our clients are Amazon brands, e-commerce brands, and sell online on marketplaces and on Shopify. So that's really our main target. But we also have brands that we worked with that sell brick and mortar and e-commerce. So it's a really wide variety. The only kind of customers we don't really work with are more consumables. So we don't work with customers, doing, food products, or, we don't inspect final supplements. We can inspect the product, as far as like on a holistic level, like packaging, things like that. But we don't really inspect, final consumable products. Like we're not going to be opening up supplements kind of thing.
Makes sense. Yeah. Gotcha. Perfect. And Sajag, if anyone listening is interested to find out more about how they could work with Movley, or they just want to get more information, what can they do to find out more?
Yeah, definitely. So you can visit movley.com, Movley.com. And we actually have that link we can put in the description here too, where if you want to talk to your factories, kind of see what questions to ask for, which starts in the negotiations and the sourcing phase, even long before you actually get started with the inspection process. We've actually put some really awesome questions that can be really useful to kind of understand your factory's quality control, to understand, what checks, what balances to use when it comes to your inspection. So that could be something really good. Check that out. Hopefully that's valuable. But yeah, you can find us at movley.com, Movley.com. And just reach out to us. We'd love to answer any questions. You can connect with me personally on Facebook, on LinkedIn. Love to, answer questions, things like that. So if you have questions on general supply chain, manufacturing, run into any issues, love to hear your thoughts, your feedback, your stories, and, love to see if we can produce content to, better help you in the future, even if it's not just inspections.
Awesome. Sajag, thank you so much for being on the show, and good luck.
Thanks so much, Joshua, for having me on. Hope this episode was valuable to everybody listening.
I'm sure it is.
Thanks for listening to the E-commerce Profits Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get notified of future episodes.